The shelter called him aggressive, but he remembered one man's voice. Most people walked past Kennel 9 without even looking. Some dogs barked, some wagged their tails. But this one, he just stared through the bars, silent, watching, as if waiting for someone no one believed would ever come. The volunteers had given up trying to approach him, too scarred, too wild. "We think he was a police dog," the manager said. "But no chips, no name, just pain." Until the day Arthur arrived, an old man with quiet eyes and a limp that matched the dog's. He came to clean cages, fold towels, routine. Nothing more. Then he saw him. No bark, no growl, just stillness. Arthur knelt, spoke one name like a prayer wrapped in gravel. Coda. And the dog moved. It was the kind of moment you don't expect in a world like ours, where people give up fast and scars don't always heal. But this time, they did. And when the truth unraveled about who Coda was and where he had been, it didn't just change one man's life. It changed an entire town's definition of loyalty. The sky above Millage was washed in that kind of pale gray that made everything seem quieter than it was. The kind of sky that didn't promise rain, but carried the weight of it anyway. Arthur Quinn adjusted the collar of his faded coat as he stepped out onto the porch of his modest home, boots crunching against brittle leaves that had fallen overnight. He paused, just for a breath, at the top step. In his right coat pocket, his hand closed around a small, smooth object, a silver tag worn thin by time. The name engraved on it was fading, but he didn't need to read it. Jay. 15 years ago to the day, that little pup with giant paws had tripped over his own ears trying to climb into Arthur's arms. And 1 year ago, almost to the hour, Arthur had held his best friend for the last time. Jay's body had grown too tired, his heart too old. The vet had said it was peaceful. But no one could describe what it felt like to watch the one soul who waited for you at the door every single day never get up again. Arthur didn't talk much about grief. He had fought fires for 3 decades. He'd carried strangers out of collapsed buildings. He'd lost friends, seen smoke take what fire could not. But losing Jay? That wasn't heat or chaos. That was stillness. And stillness was harder to survive. The morning air bit at his lungs as he started walking, same route as always, past the row of mailboxes no one used anymore, past the rusted swing set in the neighborhood park where Jay once chased squirrels with comical dedication, barking like he was defending the Constitution. Jay had been more than a pet. He was Arthur's shadow, his purpose when the uniform came off. Retirement had hit hard. Jay had softened it, filled the house with presence, silence with breath, and loss with loyalty. Today, the leash looped in Arthur's hand swung empty. The Haven Hollow Rescue Shelter sat on the edge of town, tucked beside an old maple grove and a gravel service road. It wasn't fancy, weather-worn siding, windows smudged with time, but it had something rare, hope that didn't brag about itself. Arthur had started volunteering there shortly after Jay passed. At first, it was just to be near the sound of dogs again. Then it became a way to keep showing up for something, for someone. The shelter was filled with those in-between animals, not puppies with ribbons or purebreds with papers. These were the forgotten ones, the half-healed, the too old, the too much. He understood them. He rounded the back, where the gravel turned into a path of crushed pine needles, and the smell of straw and damp fur filled the air. "Morning, Arthur," came a familiar voice. Rachel Myers, the shelter's manager, was already outside, balancing a clipboard and a steaming travel mug between mittened hands. She was younger, early 30s, whip-smart, with a heart too big for her paycheck. Her blonde ponytail poked through the back of her beanie like a soft exclamation point. Arthur nodded, giving a half-smile that didn't bother trying to be convincing. "Bit cold for October." Rachel studied his face. She didn't ask why his eyes were red. She already knew. "I was thinking of Jay this morning," she said gently. Arthur's throat tightened, but he managed to quiet. He would have turned 15 today. Rachel stepped closer, placing a gloved hand on his arm. "He was a good one." "The best," Arthur whispered. There was a beat of silence, filled only by distant barking and the flutter of leaves falling like forgotten notes. Rachel cleared her throat. "Arthur, before you get to feeding duty, I should tell you something." He raised an eyebrow. "We had a drop-off late last night. A dog. Male. German Shepherd. Looks like he was once trained. Police tags were removed, but I can tell." Arthur blinked. "What happened to him?" Rachel exhaled, her breath fogging the air. "Someone found him chained near the railroad tracks, half-starved, scarred. Doesn't let anyone near. He tore a glove off one of the techs just trying to get food inside his pen." "Where is he now?" Arthur asked, voice steady but low. "In the isolation wing. Kennel 17. We're not sure what to do yet. Honestly, we're all a little afraid of him." Arthur nodded slowly, absorbing her words. German Shepherd. Chained. Unreachable. Something stirred in his chest, not quite recognition, but something close to it. He didn't speak right away. Then he said, almost absently, "Mind if I take a look?" Rachel hesitated. "Arthur, this one's different. Not just scared damaged, it's not safe." He met her eyes. "I don't need to touch him, I just want to see." There was something in his voice. A quiet steadiness that came not from defiance but from grief that had grown roots. Rachel nodded reluctantly. "All right, just please be careful." As Arthur made his way toward the isolation wing, the hallway seemed colder, narrower. Each step echoed against concrete and chain link. The barks of the other dogs softened until only one sound remained, a low, almost inhuman whimper. Not loud, but piercing. Kennel 17 sat at the far end, its door double-latched. Arthur's hand paused on the railing. Then he looked inside and froze. In the farthest corner, barely lit by the flickering overhead bulb, a large German Shepherd crouched in the shadows. His fur was ragged, matted in places. Fresh scars glistened across his flank like burns. One ear was half torn. But it was the eyes that stopped Arthur's breath. Not blank, not savage, just lost. The dog met his gaze. A second passed, then another. And in that fragile silence something moved. A tilt of the head, a twitch of one ear. Then a faint wag of the tail. A sound escaped the dog's throat, somewhere between a whimper and a gasp. Arthur's voice trembled. "Coda." The staff kitchen at Haven Hollow Shelter still smelled faintly of old coffee and wet fur. The heater clanked somewhere in the walls, doing its best to fight off the morning chill that crept through the building's bones. Arthur sat on the edge of a metal folding chair, cradling a chipped ceramic mug between his hands. Half coffee, half memory. Rachel stood by the window, arms folded, scanning her clipboard like she was trying to will the paperwork to fix itself. But her mind was elsewhere. She kept glancing toward the end of the hallway. The isolation wing. Arthur noticed. "You mentioned a new dog," he said quietly. voice still rough from the kennel visit. "The shepherd." Rachel hesitated before answering. "Yeah." She closed the clipboard gently, like the act itself carried weight. Then she turned to face him, leaning back against the counter. "He came in last night, dropped off by a rail worker around midnight. Said he'd seen the dog chained near the southbound tracks for days. Every time he got close, the dog went ballistic. Wouldn't let anyone near him, not for food, not for water." Arthur nodded, listening closely. Rachel continued. "Animal control finally went out after the third report. They said he wasn't just aggressive, he was—" She searched for the word. "Done." Like the trust in him had been stripped down to raw instinct. Fight or flight. Mostly fight. Arthur frowned. But they got him in. They used sedation, took 2 shots. When he came to in the transport cage, he almost ripped the gate off. A silence settled between them. Arthur stared into his coffee, letting her words sink in. He'd seen that before, more than once. Dogs broken by bad hands. Good hearts turned in on themselves like barbed wire. "Police trained?" he asked finally. Rachel gave a small nod. "That's the thing. You can tell. His posture, the way he moves. Even sedated. There's a pattern in his reactions, like he's still trying to follow commands that never come. Or came too late." Arthur looked up. "Tags?" "Gone. Collar, too. Just the outline of where it used to be, like a phantom limb." Her voice dropped. "But there's something else." She reached into the file bin behind her and slid a manila folder across the table. Arthur opened it to find 2 Polaroids. The first showed a blurry image of the shepherd curled into himself, ribs visible through patchy fur. The second was harder to look at. A close-up. The left side of the dog's face bore a scar that ran from eye socket to jaw, curving unnaturally. There was a wound on his hind leg that looked recent stitched clumsily. Too wide to be from a fence. Maybe a blade. Arthur exhaled through his nose. Someone hurt him on purpose. Rachel didn't respond. She didn't have to. He picked up one of the photos and held it under the weak fluorescent light. The dog's eyes were glassy in the picture, like he wasn't looking at the camera but through it, beyond it, like he didn't expect anyone to ever look back. "He's in Kennel 17? Rachel nodded. "Isolation. I haven't let any of the volunteers near him. Staff, too, except Janice, and even she won't go in the room anymore." Arthur's jaw clenched. He stared at the photo a moment longer, then gently set it down. "What's the plan?" Rachel bit her lip. "I don't know. We have to evaluate him. See if there's any chance at rehabilitation. But if he's police trained, and that training was corrupted by abuse, he's unpredictable. Dangerous, a liability." Arthur leaned back in the chair, the muscles in his shoulders tight. "He wasn't always that way." "No," Rachel agreed. "But we don't know who he is anymore, or what was done to him after he stopped being a badge." The room went quiet again. Outside, a wind stirred the brittle leaves across the gravel lot. Somewhere down the hall, a dog barked once, sharply, then silence. "You said earlier he let you near," Rachel added cautiously. "In the kennel." Arthur nodded. "He didn't bite. Didn't growl after the first few seconds, just stared like he was waiting for something." Rachel's brow furrowed. "And then?" "He whimpered," Arthur said softly, and wagged his tail. Her arms dropped to her sides. For a moment she looked almost vulnerable. "That's the first time he's done that since he got here. No one's gotten that close." Arthur looked back toward the hallway. "I want to try again." Rachel's voice tensed. "Arthur, I know you. I know your heart. But this isn't about compassion right now. This is about safety for you and for him. If he lashes out, we could be facing quarantine protocol, or worse." "He won't," Arthur said. "Not if I go slow." She walked over and sat across from him, speaking lower now. "What are you not telling me?" Arthur didn't answer at first, then quietly. "When I said his eyes looked familiar, I wasn't being poetic." Rachel tilted her head. "I trained a shepherd named Coda 15 years ago. He was young, strong, sharp. We worked on arson investigations. Last I heard, he was reassigned to a K-9 unit in another district after I retired." Arthur swallowed hard. 3 years ago, there was a warehouse explosion outside Fairview. A raid gone wrong, one officer died. Coda was listed as lost in the fire." Rachel's voice was almost a whisper. "You think this dog is him?" "I don't know," Arthur said. "But if it is, then he wasn't lost. He was taken." Silence hung between them again, heavier this time. Rachel stood. "I'll give you 10 minutes, supervised. That's all I can do without calling the board." Arthur rose, tugging his sleeves down. 10 minutes is enough." She reached into the supply locker and pulled out a soft nylon leash, setting it gently in his hand. "You still remember how to speak their language?" she asked, half teasing, half hoping. Arthur didn't smile. "It's not a language, it's a promise." The door to the isolation wing let out a tired groan as Arthur pushed it open. The hallway beyond was quieter than the rest of the shelter. No friendly barks, no tails thudding against kennel walls. Just the low hum of the overhead lights, and a tension that seemed to breathe from the cinder block walls themselves. The air was colder here, heavier. As he walked past the first few kennels, most of the dogs kept their distance. Some growled low. One just stared, eyes dull, as if they'd stopped expecting kindness. But Kennel 17 wasn't like the others. It wasn't just the double locks or the warning sign zip-tied to the latch. Caution, no entry without staff. It was the silence radiating from inside, the kind that didn't feel natural. It felt like something had curled in on itself and refused to come out. Arthur paused a few feet away, keeping his posture relaxed. No sudden moves, no hard eye contact yet. He'd trained dozens of canines in his day, aggressive, traumatized, unpredictable, but this was different. This wasn't a dog bracing to fight. This was a dog bracing to survive. He knelt slowly, one knee at a time, until his eyes were level with the small window of wire mesh. And then he looked in. At first, the shadows revealed nothing. The back of the kennel was so dim he could barely make out movement. But then a shape shifted. A large form pressed into the farthest corner, back legs tucked tight, front paws trembling slightly on the concrete floor. The dog's head lifted. Two yellow-brown eyes blinked at him, sharp and wild, framed by a face marred with scars. The German shepherd growled. Not loud, but low. A sound that vibrated more than it echoed, like gravel moving under ice. The kind of growl that said, "I've been hurt too many times to trust first." Arthur didn't move. He stayed still, breathing steady, hands visible. "It's all right," he said gently, the tone barely above a whisper. "No one's going to touch you. You've been through enough." The dog didn't growl again, but it didn't look away either. The eyes locked onto Arthur's like they were trying to calculate something. Not aggression, not submission, just recognition, trying to wake up from under rubble. Seconds passed, a dozen, maybe more. Then something shifted, a twitch of the left ear, a faint lift of the head, a barely audible intake of breath, almost like a gasp, and the growl faded into a deep, uncertain whimper. Arthur leaned a little closer to the mesh, careful not to breach the dog's comfort line. "Hey now," he said softly. "You don't have to be afraid." And that's when it happened. The dog's posture changed, not completely, not like flipping a switch, but enough to see it. The trembling slowed, the pupils widened, his chest rose, then fell, as if trying to remember what calm used to feel like. And then, without warning, the tail moved, once, a slow, hesitant wag, not out of joy but possibility. Arthur's heart clenched. He hadn't seen a movement like that since— "God," he whispered, blinking against the sting in his eyes. "It can't be." He leaned a little closer, staring into the shepherd's face, searching for something buried under the grime and the damage and the distance. And then the dog did something else. He let out a cry, not loud, not sharp, but the kind of sound that came from the deepest part of a chest that had held its breath too long. A single, broken syllable of memory. Arthur's lips parted. The leash in his hand trembled. Coda. The name floated out like a forgotten prayer, and the second it hit the air, the German shepherd flinched. Not away. Toward. His eyes lit like sparks, catching in dry timber. He rose, slow and stiff, muscles protesting with every step, and took one trembling step forward, then another. The chain link rattled as he reached the kennel door, pressing his scarred muzzle through the smallest space he could find, nose twitching, sniffing like he was chasing something he hadn't dared believe was real. Arthur knelt fully now, hand braced on the concrete. "If you remember me, I'm here. I never stopped." The dog whined again, louder this time. He pressed his forehead against the metal, eyes never breaking contact. Arthur's own voice cracked. "They said you were gone, that you didn't make it out of that fire. But I swear." He reached one slow hand to the gate, not opening it, just letting it rest there, fingers curved. The shepherd didn't recoil. Instead, he sat, slowly, painfully, like his bones remembered more than his mind did, and stared at Arthur with eyes that shimmered now in the dim light. Behind Arthur, Rachel had appeared silently at the doorway. She hadn't spoken, afraid to disturb the fragile thing blooming in that kennel. When Arthur finally stood, his legs stiff and heart thundering, he turned to her without looking away from the shepherd. "I need to open this door," he said quietly. Rachel stepped forward, voice trembling. "Arthur, we don't know what he'll do." "He already told me," Arthur replied, voice steady. "He remembered me, even when the world didn't." The shepherd leaned his head sideways, letting it rest against the cold steel. His tail wagged again, a little stronger this time. Arthur moved his hand to the latch, and everything that had once broken held still. The silence in Kennel 17 was so fragile, it felt like even breathing too loudly might shatter it. Arthur's fingers hovered above the latch, worn metal cool against his skin. He could feel Rachel's presence behind him, her hesitation, her worry, the thousands of worst-case scenarios tightening her jaw, but he never took his eyes off the shepherd on the other side of the door. The dog hadn't moved since Arthur whispered his name, still sitting, still pressed against the chain link like it was the only thing keeping him grounded in this world, tail still wagging, slow but steady, no growl, no tension in the shoulders, just waiting. "Arthur," Rachel said, her voice low and tight, "we need to think this through. If he snaps—" "He won't," Arthur cut in gently. You don't know that. He finally glanced over his shoulder, meeting her eyes. No, I don't. But something in him does. He remembered me, Rachel. I saw it in his face before I said a word. Rachel hesitated, then stepped closer, her voice barely audible. We've had dogs that faked calm before, learned how to mask it. It's not their fault. It's survival instinct, but one noise, one flashback. He's not pretending, Arthur said, his voice steady. He's remembering. And then, without waiting for permission, Arthur clicked the first latch. Rachel stiffened. Arthur. He clicked the second. The door swung open a few inches with a soft clink. For a moment, nothing happened. The shepherd didn't charge, didn't retreat. He just stared at the small crack in the door like it was the first crack in a prison wall. Then, slowly, so slowly, it almost felt like a dream, he rose. Each paw step forward was hesitant, trembling, but deliberate. Arthur stepped back once, giving space, knees soft, body relaxed. The shepherd slipped out of the kennel, nose low to the ground, tail wagging now with an unsteady rhythm. He sniffed Arthur's shoes, then his coat, then paused. And then it happened. The dog raised his head, looked Arthur in the eye, and launched forward. Rachel gasped, stumbling backward, arms up, expecting a snarl, teeth, claws, blood. But the sound that came next wasn't a growl. It was a whimper, a full-bodied, soul-deep, broken sound of something that had been silent too long. The shepherd knocked Arthur to the ground, not with violence, but desperation. And the moment Arthur hit the concrete, the dog was on him, not biting, but licking his face with a feverish kind of joy, tail thumping like a drum against the floor. Arthur let out a surprised breath that turned into a quiet laugh as tears blurred his vision. He wrapped his arms around the shepherd's neck, burying his face in matted fur that still smelled faintly of smoke and fear. "It's you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's really you." The shepherd pressed harder into him, panting, whining, as if trying to apologize for every lost second, for every night he hadn't come home. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway, hand over her mouth, eyes wide and glistening. She had seen dogs in trauma, seen the long road it took to rebuild trust days, weeks, sometimes never. And yet, this dog, this moment. "He was untouchable yesterday," she said softly. "He tried to bite through a steel bowl. We couldn't even get near the gate." Arthur looked up at her from the floor, arms still wrapped around the dog. "Because I wasn't here yet." Rachel blinked rapidly, trying to process what she was witnessing. "Arthur, if this really is Coda." "It is," he said. No hesitation. No doubt. Just faith laced with memory. He didn't just survive. He remembered his way home. The shepherd finally eased off Arthur's chest and sat beside him, tail still wagging, tongue lolling slightly. One ear was still bent, torn at the tip, but his posture had changed. No longer crouched, no longer ready to run. He looked like he had just remembered who he was. Arthur sat up slowly, one hand resting on the dog's back. "You came back from wherever they put you, and you waited. Somehow you knew I'd show up here." Rachel stepped closer now, kneeling beside them. Her eyes traced the shepherd's scars, the worn pads of his paws, the hollow places on his sides where muscle had wasted away. "This is more than trauma," she said. "This is a story trying to find its ending." Arthur nodded. "Then let's help him finish it." The shepherd leaned into him again, body heavy with trust. Rachel reached out slowly, palm open. The dog flinched but didn't growl. Instead, he gave her a long, cautious sniff, then a lick. Rachel let out a trembling laugh. All right, you're a miracle, aren't you?" Arthur's voice lowered. "He's a fighter. But more than that, he's a survivor." She looked at Arthur now, eyes filled with something beyond words. "We're going to need to call the vet, start treatment, behavioral therapy, evaluation, DNA tests if we can. This won't be easy." Arthur looked down at the shepherd beside him. "I don't care how long it takes, I'm not leaving him again." And in that small, cold hallway that had once been filled with nothing but fear and chain link, something warm bloomed, a memory restored, a promise renewed. Rachel straightened and stepped back. "I'll make the calls. But Arthur, you need to know there will be people who won't believe this, who'll say it's just a resemblance, wishful thinking." Arthur stood slowly, the shepherd rising beside him like a shadow reattached. He dusted off his coat, then looked down at the dog. "He doesn't need anyone else to believe it," Arthur said softly. "He already knows who he is." The shepherd gave a soft bark, like punctuation, and this time even the concrete walls seemed to echo it back. The storm had rolled in fast that night, thick clouds bleeding across the sky like ink dropped in water. The kind of weather that made your gut tighten, even before the call came through. Arthur remembered the buzz of the phone on his kitchen table. He hadn't worn a uniform in over a decade, but his heart still responded like it used to, faster, sharper, ready. Some habits, like some bonds, never retire. He picked up the call, a familiar voice, low, tense. Warehouse fire. Suspected arson. Multiple canines deployed. Arthur didn't breathe. "Coda's unit is inside." And just like that, the world narrowed to a pinpoint. He had trained Coda himself, not just the standard obedience drills or scent work. Arthur had shaped him from the ground up, taught him how to think, how to decide, how to protect without always being told. Coda had been special from the start. Smart enough to map a room before a handler finished a sentence. Brave enough to cross fire lines. Gentle enough to let toddlers tug his ears without so much as a blink. But what set him apart was something Arthur never taught instinct to save, even when it hurt. Arthur wasn't part of active duty anymore. But when he drove toward the scene that night, he did it like a man possessed, ran 2 red lights, barely noticed the rain pelting the windshield, or the way his hands trembled on the wheel. The warehouse sat on the edge of the industrial zone, already half-eaten by flames. The orange glow painted the sky like a wound. Sirens screamed from every direction. Fire crews battled back the inferno. But Arthur's eyes searched only for one thing. "Coda!" he yelled as he stepped onto the scene. "Has anyone seen Coda?" A young officer stopped him. "Sir, you can't be here." "I trained the dog you sent in there," Arthur snapped, voice cutting through the chaos. "Where is he?" The officer hesitated, then pointed toward a charred section of collapsed wall. "He went in with Officer Delgado. They cleared the west wing, but something blew in the back propane tank, we think. Officer Delgado made it out, barely." "And the dog?" Arthur's voice dropped. The officer's face hardened. "Didn't come out. We're still looking, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Arthur moved toward the debris anyway, boots crunching through wet ash. A paramedic reached out to stop him. Arthur shook him off. "You don't understand," he muttered. "He'll come to me. If he's alive, he'll come to me." But Coda never did. The next morning, They declared him dead. No body was recovered. Just a piece of burnt harness, half a badge tag, and a set of scorched paw prints that ended near the blast site. The official report called it a line of duty loss. A commendation was filed. A plaque was promised. His photo taken just weeks before, tongue out and eyes alert, was mounted on the department memorial wall. Arthur didn't attend the ceremony. Instead, he sat in his house surrounded by silence, staring at Coda's old crate, untouched, still clean, still waiting. He didn't cry right away. That came later, quiet, strangled sobs at 2 a.m. when he thought no one would hear. He'd spent a career running into buildings that should have killed him, pulling others out. But this loss, this one knocked the air out of his soul. Friends tried to comfort him. He died doing what he loved. He was a hero. At least it was quick. Arthur nodded, smiled politely. But inside, he never stopped hearing that low bark. The one Coda used when he found something, or someone. The bark that said, "I'm here. I found it. I found you." For weeks, Arthur couldn't bring himself to pack away the gear. He kept Coda's collar on the hook by the door, left his water bowl out. Sometimes he swore he heard nails clicking on the hallway floor at night, just for a moment. Then it would be gone. Eventually, he started walking again, alone, past the old training fields, past the fire station, past the neighborhood Coda used to patrol, tail wagging like he owned every block. But he never stopped listening. And part of him, though he would never admit it, never stopped calling. Back in the present, Arthur sat on the edge of the shelter cot beside the sleeping shepherd. Coda, because it was him. There wasn't room for doubt anymore. The moment he'd collapsed into Arthur's arms, tail wagging, tongue frantic with joy, the question had dissolved into something bigger than logic. Rachel had stepped out to call the vet. The rest of the shelter had gone quiet. It was just them now. Coda stirred in his sleep, a whimper slipping from his throat. His paws twitched like he was still running through fire, still looking for a way out. Arthur reached down and laid a weathered hand on his side. "Easy, boy," he whispered. "You made it. I've got you now." He stared at the scars, the too-thin frame, the haunted breath. All of it told a story. The report never did. Coda hadn't died that night. He'd survived. Alone, injured, likely stolen, sold, used. Whatever path had brought him back, chained by the railroad, feral and forgotten, it had been paved in pain. But even through that, he remembered. Arthur leaned back, resting his shoulders against the cool cinder-block wall, eyes closed, heart full. "He never left me," he whispered to the room. "He just couldn't find his way back." The sterile scent of antiseptic hit the hallway long before she did. Dr. Eva Nguyen entered the shelter with her medical bag slung over one shoulder and a clipboard tucked beneath her arm. At barely 5'3", she moved with the quiet intensity of someone who didn't waste time, not because she was cold, but because she had seen too much pain to dress it in small talk. Rachel met her at the door. "He's in the back, kennel wing. Isolation room's been cleared out." Eva raised an eyebrow. "The shepherd?" Rachel nodded. "Arthur's with him." That gave Eva pause. "The one who found him?" she asked. "No," Rachel said softly. "The one who lost him." Coda lay curled on a padded cot now, eyes closed, but his ears twitched at every unfamiliar sound. Arthur sat beside him, knees bent, one hand gently resting along the dog's spine. That simple contact had become an anchor for both of them. the kind of connection that didn't require explanation. When Eva stepped inside, the shepherd lifted his head sharply, body tensing, his eyes locked onto her. Arthur whispered, "Easy, boy. She's here to help." The dog didn't growl, but he didn't relax either. His body stayed coiled, trembling beneath the surface like a wire stretched too tight. Eva knelt several feet away, letting him see her, smell her. Her voice was even. "I'm not going to touch you until you're ready. Okay?" Coda blinked. Then, slowly, his gaze shifted to Arthur. Arthur gave a gentle nod. "It's all right. She's family." Coda didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, and maybe that was enough. With a grunt, he laid his head back down and let out a long, exhausted breath. Eva moved closer. The exam took place in fragments, measured steps of trust. She didn't rush, didn't reach without warning. Every time she touched a paw, a joint, or leaned near his ears, she murmured quietly, letting him anticipate her hands. Arthur stayed close, murmuring soft encouragements. "That's it. You're all right now. Just let her see, buddy." The more they worked, the more the damage emerged. "He's underweight," Eva noted, running her fingers down his ribs. "Badly. At least 15 pounds lost. Could be from stress, poor diet, neglect, or all three." She gently lifted his hind leg and paused. "Femur fracture," she murmured. "Old, not healed right. Probably splinted without proper alignment. He likely limps after long walks." Arthur's jaw tightened. Eva moved to his shoulder. "Burn scarring along the right flank. Chemical, most likely. You see this texture?" She traced the fur's jagged edge. "That's not from fire. That's from something man-made." Arthur looked down at his hands. "He went through hell." Eva didn't disagree. She checked his teeth, his eyes, the pads of his feet. Scars on the gums suggest he was muzzled tightly, maybe even wired. Rachel, who'd stood silently in the doorway, winced. Then Eva stepped back, took out a small vial and needle. "I'd like to run a blood panel, see if there's microchip data left, or drug residues." Arthur nodded. "Do what you need." The moment the needle slid in, Coda flinched. His head jerked, not to bite, but to escape. Arthur caught his muzzle gently, pressing his forehead to Coda's. "Shh. I've got you. You're safe now. You're safe." Eva withdrew the needle swiftly, expertly. A single drop of blood hit the inside of the vial. "All done?" Coda whimpered, but didn't pull away again. His body trembled. But then he nudged his head into Arthur's hand and stilled. Eva watched that moment longer than a vet usually would. "He trusts you," she said quietly. Arthur nodded, voice hoarse. "He always did." Eva packed up the vial, labeled it with neat precision, then sat back on her heels. "You said his name was Coda?" Arthur nodded. "I've seen hundreds of dogs with police training," Eva said, gesturing toward the shepherd. "But this one? He responds like it's deeper. Not just a command tone or repetition. He's syncing with you bonded. That's not something you can fake. Not even under duress." Arthur rubbed Coda's shoulder, the familiar ridge of muscle beneath scar tissue. "I trained him when he was barely past 6 months old. The first time he found a trapped kid under rubble, he didn't wait for the command. Just went. Dug until his paws bled. He wouldn't let the medics near the boy until he heard my voice again." He looked at Eva now, something fierce in his eyes. "They said he died. They handed me a burnt tag and told me that was it." Eva's gaze softened. "And yet here he is." Arthur exhaled slowly. He never left me. He just couldn't find his way back. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling a loose panel on the side of the shelter. Rain tapped softly against the window, like fingers trying to get in. Rachel stepped forward finally, holding something in her hands, an old folder from the shelter's archives. This came with him, intake notes from the transport team. Not much, no name, no origin, but she handed the paper to Arthur. In the margins, someone had scribbled, "Too trained for a stray." Eva stood beside them, folding her arms. If this blood work confirms prior registration, and if those old injuries match archived canine files, we'll have more than memory to go on. Arthur didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the dog sleeping beside him. The world had written Coda off as a casualty, but the truth was far more brutal and far more miraculous. He had survived the fire, survived whatever came after. And against every instinct that pain had carved into him, he had remembered the one person who would still call him home. Arthur placed his hand over Coda's heart. "You came back," he whispered. "Now we do the rest. Together." And for the first time in over a year, the old shepherd didn't flinch from the touch. He leaned into it. By morning, the air smelled of thawing soil and the kind of fog that clung low to the ground, gentle, ghost-like, as if the town itself was still unsure whether to wake or keep dreaming. Inside the Haven Hollow Shelter's front office, the fluorescent lights flickered to life one by one. Coffee brewed in the corner, steam curling into the stillness. The walls, usually cluttered with community flyers and cartoon posters of smiling pets, suddenly felt too sterile for what had just happened. Arthur sat across from Rachel's desk, a pen in one hand, Coda's leash wrapped gently in the other. The German shepherd lay at his feet, chin resting on Arthur's boot, like a dog that had never known any other place to belong. But belonging, Arthur was quickly learning, didn't mean ownership. Rachel placed a slim stack of papers on the desk between them. Her face was tired but kind, pulled taut by both hope and responsibility. "I've been on the phone with the board since 6 this morning," she said, rubbing her temples. "Woke half of them up." Arthur gave a small smile. "Bet they weren't thrilled." "Not at first," she admitted. "But once I told them the story, your connection to Coda, what happened last night, the history you share, even the more skeptical ones went quiet." She slid the top sheet forward. "Technically, though, he's still shelter property. No chip on record. No registered proof of ID. If someone contests it down the line, unlikely but possible, we have to follow protocol." Arthur stared at the paper. Words like temporary custody, medical hold, evaluation period sat like weights on the page. Bureaucracy wrapped around a bond that didn't need validating. "I'm not giving him up again," he said quietly. Rachel nodded. "I know. And I don't think you'll have to." She handed him a pen. "This is a temporary release form. It allows you to house and care for Coda during the identification and recovery period. Technically, it's still a foster arrangement, but you'll be his handler. Fully." Arthur took the pen but didn't write right away. "He doesn't need another transition," he said. "He needs to know he's home." "He already does," Rachel replied. "He hasn't let you out of his sight in 12 hours. I had to bribe him with a piece of turkey just to check his IV." Arthur's gaze dropped to Coda, who, despite the fatigue in his bones, lifted his eyes at the sound of Arthur's voice. Tail thumped gently once. "I'll sign it," Arthur said. "But I want this clear. He's not temporary. Not to me." Rachel softened. That's why I pushed for the exception. Dogs like him cases this complex, they usually end up flagged. Dangerous. Unstable. The board almost always recommends transfer or euthanasia. Arthur stiffened. I told them, she continued, that this dog is different, that whatever broke him didn't erase who he was. And you proved it the moment he remembered your name. Arthur signed the paper. The ink dried fast. The air felt lighter. Rachel reached into her drawer and handed over a new collar-plain black nylon with a blank silver tag attached by a fresh ring. We can engrave it later, she said. Arthur clipped the collar around Coda's neck with careful hands. The dog didn't resist. He just leaned in, eyes fluttering shut for a moment like even that small gesture was healing something unspoken. I still have his old tag, Arthur murmured. Burnt at the edges, but I kept it. Rachel stood and stepped around the desk. Then when he's ready, when you're ready, we'll make sure he wears both. Coda stood slowly, joints cracking with effort. But he didn't limp. He pressed his head into Arthur's side and stayed there, breathing slow and deep, like he finally believed he was allowed to rest. Arthur reached down and scratched behind his ear, where the fur was softest. You're not a case anymore, he whispered. You're just Coda. Rachel watched the scene for a moment, then cleared her throat. There's one more thing, she said. The media is starting to pick it up. Arthur blinked. Media? The overnight staff posted a photo just one of you two sleeping in the kennel together. It went viral. People are calling it the dog who came back. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Catchy, she smiled. They're asking questions. About the reunion. About the shelter. About you. Arthur looked down at Coda again. Let them ask. Just don't make him a spectacle. We won't, Rachel promised. But your story might give other people hope. Other dogs like him a second chance. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. As long as he gets to keep his peace. He stood, the leash trailing gently in his hand. Coda followed instantly, head high, eyes alert. No hesitation in his steps now, just that quiet confidence of a soldier who had found his commander again. As they stepped outside into the late morning air, Rachel watched them go. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting long golden lines across the parking lot. Coda paused at the door, looking back just once, as if to make sure Rachel wasn't far behind in the journey she'd helped start. She lifted a hand. Take care of each other. Arthur looked over his shoulder. We always have. And with that, they walked forward, man and dog. Together again, not just because of signatures or policy changes, but because something deeper had refused to give up. Not time, not fire, not even silence. Some bonds weren't made. They were remembered. The leash hung loose between them, more a formality than necessity. Coda walked just slightly behind Arthur head level with his hip, eyes sweeping the sidewalk with that quiet vigilance only a dog who's served truly understands. His steps were cautious, not because of fear, but as if every crack in the pavement carried a memory he hadn't quite placed yet. Arthur didn't rush. They moved slowly down Sycamore Avenue, the early autumn wind stirring the red and gold leaves into gentle spirals at their feet. The street was familiar, unchanged in all the ways that mattered. Mailboxes leaning, porches draped with pumpkins, the faint scent of chimney smoke and laundry detergent in the air. But this morning something felt different. Maybe it was the dog. Maybe it was the way everything else seemed to pause as they passed. The first to notice them was Mr. Daly, the retired bus driver who always swept his porch just after 9 a.m., whether it needed it or not. He leaned on his broom as they walked by, eyes narrowing behind thick glasses. "Arthur?" he called. "That Jay with you?" Arthur paused. He didn't speak right away. Coda stopped too, sitting neatly at his side like it was rehearsed. "No," Arthur said quietly. "Jay passed last year." Daly frowned, confused. "But that dog, he looks just like—" Arthur smiled faintly. "Different name. Same soul." Daly didn't understand, not fully. But he nodded, tipping his chin toward the dog. "Well, he walks like he's been here before." Arthur nodded back. "That's because he has." They moved on. On the next block, two boys on scooters skidded to a stop at the corner. One pointed. "That's the guy with the fire dog," the younger one whispered. Arthur heard it but didn't interrupt. Coda's ears flicked toward the sound, but he didn't react. His gait never broke. There was something regal in the way he carried himself. Scarred, yes, but still proud, as if each limp held a lesson, not a weakness. They passed a garden where Mrs. Elkins was trimming her sunflowers. Her trowel fell into the soil when she saw them. "My God," she murmured, stepping closer. "Arthur, is that—" He gave a nod. "It can't be," she whispered, crouching a little to get a better look. Coda tilted his head at her, tail giving one polite sweep. Her hand hovered just above his nose before she dared let it fall gently onto his head. Her voice trembled. "Jay always liked me. But this one, he's gentler." Arthur looked down at Coda. "He's been through more." By the time they reached the corner of Willow and Main, 5 other neighbors had emerged, some from porches, some just standing in doorways, holding coffee mugs that had gone cold. Arthur wasn't a man who enjoyed attention, but today he didn't shy from it either, because for the first time since Jay passed, the walk felt full again, not just in noise or weight, but in meaning. And people saw it. They didn't see just an old man and a dog. They saw something stitched back together, something they didn't have words for, but felt deep down in their bones. A second chance, a promise returned. Halfway down Main, they passed the small hardware store with the cracked window display and the hand-painted "Open" sign swinging lightly in the wind. Out came Melanie Whitaker, the store's co-owner and Arthur's neighbor of almost 20 years. She froze on the steps. "Arthur," she breathed, "is it really him?" Arthur slowed, letting Coda sit beside him. The dog's chest rose and fell calmly, eyes soft as they locked on Melanie. She knelt without thinking, tears pooling. "You lost him in the fire," she whispered. "I remember. You didn't come out for days." Arthur didn't answer. He crouched beside Coda, letting his fingers brush through the thick fur at the shepherd's neck. "I didn't lose him," he said. "He just got stuck in the dark." Melanie reached forward, and Coda leaned into her hand like he recognized her sorrow, like her grief was part of his too. When they finally turned onto Cedar Row, the last street before home, the breeze picked up just enough to make the wind chimes on Arthur's porch sing faintly in the distance. Coda heard them and perked up. His steps quickened. Not a run, but a pull like he remembered something waiting at the end of this road. Arthur noticed the shift. "You know where you are, don't you?" he murmured. Coda didn't look up. He just kept walking. Past the mailbox where Jay once chased squirrels. Past the garden that still bloomed, though no one tended it. And finally, Up the familiar steps of the old cottage with the crooked screen door and porch light that flickered even when it wasn't turned on. Arthur stood at the bottom step. Coda stood at the top, looking back, eyes expectant, not anxious, just ready. Arthur climbed slowly, age in his knees, time in his shoulders, but something lighter in his chest. He reached the door, didn't need the key, just pushed it open. Coda didn't wait for permission. He stepped inside, as if no time had passed at all. The door creaked softly as Arthur stepped inside, Coda already a few paces ahead, moving not like a guest, but like someone who had finally returned home after a journey too long and too cruel. The air inside the cottage held the stillness of a place that hadn't dared to exhale in a year. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting dust motes that drifted like ghosts in golden silence. Everything was where it had always been: the coat rack by the door, the cracked ceramic bowl on the entryway table, the framed photos that had stopped gaining new memories since Jay passed. Coda didn't sniff wildly. He didn't pace or explore like other dogs might have. Instead, he moved slowly, deliberately, following familiar currents in an old river. His nails clicked softly against the wooden floorboards as he turned the corner toward the living room. And then he froze. Arthur watched from behind, heart lodged somewhere between awe and ache. The bed was still there, pressed into the corner by the fireplace where the warmth used to pool in winter evenings, a thick, brown, memory-worn cushion with Jay's name embroidered on one corner. No one had touched it in months. Arthur had vacuumed around it once or twice, but never dared move it. It had become part of the architecture of grief, a monument to something he couldn't bring himself to let go of. Coda stared at it. He didn't approach right away. He just stood there, ears forward, tail low and still, like he was waiting for permission from something unseen. Or perhaps remembering. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. One paw, then the next. He lowered his head and inhaled deeply. The scent long faded for human noses, but not for his. His nose twitched, eyes blinking, chest rising as if something inside him untangled, and then, without fanfare, he circled once, then again, 3 slow revolutions that felt more like a ritual than a habit. And he lay down, not gingerly, not fearfully. He settled, like a puzzle piece sliding back into place. Arthur's knees nearly gave out. He crossed the room, stepping slowly, his breath caught in his throat. When he reached the edge of the hearth, he knelt beside the bed. Coda looked up at him, eyes heavy but content, breathing slow, one paw folded beneath his chest. Arthur reached out and brushed a hand along his fur, rougher now, coarser, scarred, but warm, alive. "I kept it for you," he whispered, voice breaking, "even when I stopped believing." Coda didn't move, but his eyes closed as if the words themselves were enough. The fireplace hadn't been lit in over a year. Arthur rose, moved to the stack of logs beside it, and began to build the kindling the way he always had, slowly, deliberately, with hands that remembered what warmth meant. A few minutes later, the first flame caught. It crackled gently, filling the room with amber light that danced across Coda's coat and threw flickering shadows onto the walls. It was the first time the hearth had felt like home since Jay had left it empty. Arthur sank into his old armchair, worn leather, creaking with familiarity, and watched Coda breathe, the rise and fall of his chest, the occasional twitch of an ear, the slight curl of his tail as it wrapped around his side. How many nights had Arthur sat in that very chair, staring at that empty bed, imagining it filled? How many times had he whispered to the silence, "I miss you, boy," and hoped something beyond logic was listening? Now, silence had answered. The clock ticked on the mantel. Outside, wind rustled through leaves. Inside, only the fire spoke. Soft cracks, low murmurs of heat meeting timber. Arthur reached toward the small side table, pulling out a photo from the drawer. Jay, as a pup, tongue out, leaning against a younger version of Arthur. Behind them, Coda, smaller then, barely 9 months old, already watchful. He smiled at the memory. "You remember him, don't you?" he said softly. Coda stirred. Eyes half-lidded, he gave a soft huff. Not quite a bark, not quite a sigh. Arthur chuckled through the tears. "Yeah, I figured you did." He placed the photo face up on the floor beside the bed. Coda shifted just enough to lay one paw near it. It was nothing grand. No parade, no reunion on national television. Just a fire. An old man. A scarred dog in a bed that had waited too long to be used again. And yet, it felt like the whole world had just exhaled. That night, long after the sun had gone, Arthur woke in the middle of the night. He didn't know why. Just the faint sense that something had changed. He stepped out of bed and padded softly into the living room. Coda hadn't moved from the bed. But when Arthur appeared in the doorway, the shepherd lifted his head, eyes bright in the dim glow of the dying fire. Their eyes met. No sound, no movement. Just that deep, unspeakable knowing. Arthur crossed the room, sat beside him on the rug, and leaned against the stone of the fireplace. Coda shifted, pressing his body against Arthur's thigh. No space between them now. Not ever again. Arthur placed a hand over Coda's heart, felt it beat beneath his palm. "I thought I'd never hear that again," he whispered. And Coda, battered, burned, broken, and rebuilt, leaned his head into Arthur's lap. The empty bed was no longer empty, and neither was Arthur. The fire had long since burned down to glowing embers, their light pulsing like a slow, sleeping heartbeat in the darkened room. Outside, the wind had stilled. The world seemed wrapped in a thick, reverent hush, as if even the night was trying to tread gently around the miracle that had unfolded just hours before. Arthur slept in the armchair beside the hearth, a quilt pulled loosely over his legs, glasses slipping down the bridge of his nose. His breathing was slow, his chest rising and falling in sync with the old house's creaks and sighs. For the first time in a long time, there was no weight sitting on his chest, no ache behind his ribs, just rest. The kind that only comes after hope has been proven right. Coda lay in his bed near the fire, curled in the tight, protective shape that came from too many nights without warmth. His tail twitched now and then, muscles flickering beneath the fur, caught in the rhythms of some deep dream. And then he jolted upright with a guttural, wounded howl. Arthur snapped awake instantly. Coda scrambled to his feet, claws skidding across the floorboards. His body slammed into the stone base of the hearth, knocking over the metal fire poker. The clang echoed like a gunshot. "Coda!" But the dog didn't hear him. He was no longer in the safety of a quiet room with firelight and old furniture. He was somewhere else. His eyes were wide and glassy, ears pinned back. He backed into the corner of the fireplace, panting so hard it sounded like choking. His tail tucked tightly under, his paws swiping at the air, at the memories. A low growl crawled up from his throat, not directed at Arthur, but at ghosts only he could see. Arthur's heart broke with every second. He stood slowly, hands raised. No fast movements, he muttered to himself, as if retraining his own instincts. He's not gone, he's just lost in it. He crouched to the floor and spoke softly, the way he used to in the field when the world had gone sideways and only one voice could cut through the chaos. "Coda," he said, barely a whisper. "You're not there anymore, boy. You're home." Coda didn't blink. His nails clawed frantically at the floor as if trying to escape some invisible trap. Every breath he took sounded like it hurt. Arthur crawled closer, inch by inch. "You're not in the fire," he said gently. "No more chains, no more cages, just me and you." Another soft growl escaped Coda's throat, a warning, confused. Not meant for Arthur, meant for something else. The man paused just feet away now. "All right," Arthur whispered, voice trembling. "Then I'll sit here. I'll stay right here until you come back." And he did. He sat cross-legged on the cold wooden floor just outside the reach of panic, hands resting in his lap, eyes steady. He didn't speak again for several minutes, just breathed, soft, slow, steady, so Coda would have something to match. The dog's panting began to slow. His body still trembled, but the fire in his eyes was flickering now, not out of fear, but confusion. He looked at Arthur like he was seeing him through fog. His tail twitched once, his ears lifted, one slower than the other. Arthur's voice returned, softer than before. "There you are." Coda blinked. "Remember this?" Arthur said, then began to hum. Low, quiet, just a thread of melody. An old lullaby he used to whistle on long drives. Something simple, familiar, safe. Coda's head tilted. Arthur kept humming, not words, just presence. And slowly, miraculously, Coda took a step forward, then another. He crossed the floor as if fighting through invisible thorns, shoulders hunched, eyes wide and glassy. When he reached Arthur, he didn't collapse. He didn't leap into his arms. He simply pressed his body, trembling, warm, alive, against Arthur's chest, and stood still. Arthur wrapped his arms around the dog's body, cradling him the way he used to in the earliest training days when storms were too loud and the world felt too big. "It's okay," he whispered. "Whatever they did, they didn't take you from me." Coda let out a sound, half whine, half sigh, and buried his face against Arthur's shirt, the tears wetting the fabric before the man even noticed they'd started falling. They stayed like that for a long time. The fire faded to coals. The night folded deeper. But in that little room, pressed between memory and forgiveness, a kind of healing began. Not the kind that happens all at once, not a switch flipped, not a scar erased, but the kind that starts in the bones, the kind that says, "You survived, and now you are not alone." Later, when Coda finally lay back down, his body slack with exhaustion, Arthur stayed beside him. He didn't go back to the chair. He didn't pull the quilt over his shoulders. He just lay on the floor, one hand resting on the dog's back, feeling every breath. Coda dreamed again. But this time, he didn't cry out. And Arthur's humming, soft, steady, just barely audible in the hush of the house, carried them both through the rest of the night. The morning sun had barely cleared the treetops, but Haven Hollow was already stirring. Down the road, someone was mowing a lawn. A garbage truck hissed to a halt at the corner. Life moved on, indifferent to miracles. Inside the house, Arthur moved slowly. His back ached from sleeping on the floor, but he didn't complain. Not once. Coda still lay curled in his bed by the fireplace, breathing deeply, as if each hour in this place was reclaiming something the world had tried to erase. Arthur didn't wake him. Instead, he climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, a place he hadn't entered in over a year. The wood creaked beneath his boots as he reached the door, hand pausing on the knob. He didn't know what exactly he was looking for, only that some part of him had felt it last night, in the silence after the storm in Coda's mind had passed. The attic smelled like cedar and dust, the kind of quiet that hadn't been disturbed since Jay died. Boxes stacked neatly along the back wall. One corner still held the folded American flag from Arthur's retirement. Another, a pile of photos he hadn't had the strength to look through. And near the window, a plain cardboard box, the tape yellowed and curling. It was labeled in marker, faded but still legible. Coda, Final Effects. Arthur stared at the handwriting, his own, written on a day he couldn't remember clearly, numb and trembling after the fire. After the department told him the body was unrecoverable, after they handed him what little had survived. He knelt slowly, every joint protesting, and peeled the box open. Inside were just a few things. A folded incident report, a scorched leather tug toy, half melted at the edge, a broken piece of ceramic from a K9 food bowl, and at the bottom, wrapped in soot-blackened cloth like a shroud, the collar. Arthur's hands shook as he lifted it out. The metal buckle had melted partially, warped like it had been twisted by invisible hands. The nylon strap was frayed, burned through in 2 places, and the tag was barely readable, but still clung by a blackened ring. Coda, Unit 22, property of Ridgefield PD. Arthur stared at it like it was a bone dug from a grave. And then he did something he hadn't done in months. He wept. Not the restrained tears he'd shed at the vet clinic when they declared Jay gone. Not the quiet kind that came in dreams. This was grief cracking open again. But it wasn't just pain. It was something deeper, something closer to truth. He pressed the collar against his chest, the ashes smudging his shirt, and whispered like someone delivering a secret across worlds. "You never died," he said. "You were taken." Downstairs, the fire had been relit. Coda stirred as Arthur returned. The old shepherd lifted his head from the bed, ears twitching slightly, but he didn't rise. He didn't need to. Arthur sat beside him, the box in his lap. "I kept it," he said softly, placing the collar gently beside the new one. Coda's eyes followed the movement. He sniffed the air, then leaned forward slowly, reverently, until his nose touched the burned nylon strap. He didn't recoil, didn't bark or whine, just pressed his muzzle to it, then looked back up at Arthur. Recognition, pain, acceptance. Arthur laid the 2 collars side by side on the hearth, the old, melted one like a scar, the new, clean one like a second chance. "I don't know what happened after they pulled you out," Arthur murmured. "I don't know where they took you or how you ended up chained to a railroad in a town you'd never been. But I know this." He looked into Coda's eyes. "You found your way back." Coda leaned against his leg with a quiet huff, eyes closing again. Trust returned. The rest of the morning passed slowly. Arthur spent it sorting through the box, item by item. There was a photo tucked in the bottom. Coda with Officer Delgado, taken just weeks before the explosion. Coda's eyes were alert, tongue out, vest pristine. He looked like a champion. Arthur framed it that afternoon, placed it above the hearth, next to Jay's. And then, beneath the mantel, on a reclaimed strip of oak, he carved a line with his pocket knife. The letters shaky but unmistakable. Still on duty, still home. That night, as dusk settled over Haven Hollow, Arthur lit a single candle beside the box. He didn't light it for mourning, he lit it for remembrance. And as its flame flickered, casting a warm glow over the scars, the tags, and the soot-blackened collar, Coda slept nearby, no longer as a shadow of who he was, but as someone becoming whole again. The last log crackled softly in the fireplace, its orange embers pulsing like a heartbeat that refused to quit. Outside, the wind rustled the trees gently. No storm tonight, no sirens, no distant echoes of trauma. Just the whisper of leaves, the hum of a peaceful world finally daring to settle. Inside, Arthur moved slowly across the living room, his bare feet pressing into the familiar softness of the old rug. The house was dim now, lit only by firelight and the faint golden spill of a single table lamp, casting a calm, flickering glow across the walls. The kind of light that asked for stillness. Coda had already curled into the corner of his bed, one paw tucked under his chin, breathing slow and deep. But his ears twitched every few seconds, tiny reminders that not all safety could be trusted, not yet. Some part of him still stood watch, even in rest. Arthur noticed. He grabbed the wool blanket draped over the back of the couch and settled down on the floor beside the bed. No words, just presence. He didn't want Coda to feel alone in the quiet. Not again. He folded the blanket once, twice, then lay back against the stone base of the fireplace. His body protested the angle, but he didn't move. The warmth from the embers touched his face, his hands, his heart. He let his head rest on the pillow of his bent arm and exhaled slowly. Coda shifted, lifted his head, and for a moment just watched. Arthur didn't speak, didn't move closer, just breathed, steady, soft, familiar. Coda stood, no sudden motion, no panic, and padded across the rug. His claws clicked once, twice, then sank into the fabric. He walked up beside Arthur, gave a quiet sigh, and lowered his body down half on the rug, half against Arthur's side. His head rested on Arthur's chest with a weight that felt like surrender. Arthur smiled, eyes closed. His hand rose gently, resting on Coda's back, fingers threading through the coarse fur. The fire popped once. Neither flinched. Time passed, without needing to be measured. The minutes weren't important. What mattered was breath syncing with breath, the stillness between heartbeats, the fragile space where grief once lived, now being filled with something else, not quite joy, not yet, but peace. Arthur didn't sleep right away. He listened to the way Coda's breathing had changed from alert to calm, the way his body had gone soft with trust. He remembered nights in hotel rooms during deployments when Coda would curl up at the foot of the bed, always facing the door, always listening. Even in rest, he had been a protector. And now, Arthur thought, he deserves someone to protect him back. He shifted slightly, draping the corner of the blanket over Coda's flank. "You don't have to keep watch tonight, buddy," he whispered. "That job's mine now." Coda made a soft, low sound, half huff, half sigh, and pressed a little closer. Outside the house, the porch light flickered once. A moth danced in the halo before vanishing into the dark. The street was empty. No headlights, no footsteps. just the quiet of a town sleeping with no bad news, waiting on the other side of morning. Inside, the man and the dog, once separated by fire, time, and silence, slept side by side. The nightmares didn't come that night. Coda didn't claw at invisible cages. He didn't whimper in his sleep. He didn't wake in terror. Because something had shifted, not in the world outside, but inside his bones. A slow, invisible rewiring of trust, built not on commands or training, but on nearness, on breath, on the unspoken vow of, "I'm not leaving again." Just before dawn, Arthur stirred. He blinked into the dying glow of the fireplace. The world was bathed in that soft, colorless blue that only exists between night and morning, a liminal space where nothing needs explaining. Coda was still there, pressed against him, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in the rhythm of peace. Arthur didn't move. He didn't want to break the spell. Instead, he whispered into the hush, almost to himself, "You came back." And in his sleep, Coda's tail thumped once against the floorboards. A reply. Not loud, but enough. That morning, when Rachel arrived for a check-in and knocked gently on the front door, she peered through the window and saw them both still sleeping, still curled together beside the fire. She didn't knock again. She just smiled, stepped off the porch, and walked back to her car. Some recoveries, she knew, didn't need charts or evaluations. Some recoveries just needed time, warmth, and someone to stay through the night. The morning air was crisp, still touched by the softness of dew and early fog curling along the fence posts. Inside the shelter office, Rachel Myers sipped lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug and stared at her phone screen, thumb hovering over the post button. She read the caption one more time. The dog everyone gave up on didn't give up on the one person who never stopped waiting. Attached was the photo from 2 nights ago. Arthur and Coda asleep beside the hearth, bodies pressed close, the fire behind them casting a gentle orange halo around their forms. Rachel hadn't taken it to go viral. She had taken it because, for a moment, the world had looked like it made sense again, and she wanted to remember. She hesitated. The internet could be cruel, but something in her gut whispered, "This story doesn't belong in silence." She tapped the screen. Post. Then she leaned back and waited. By the time she got home that evening, the shelter's inbox had over 300 new messages. By morning, it had tripled. The photo had spread like sparks in dry grass. People weren't just sharing it. They were writing essays in the comments, tagging friends, flooding the shelter's voicemail. Is this real? Dogs don't remember things like that, right? I thought I was the only one who kept my dog's old bed. I'm crying at work. My dad lost his K9 in Iraq. He's shaking right now. This hit us hard. I didn't even like dogs until I saw this. Now I can't stop thinking about what they carry and who carries them. Some were skeptical. Some questioned the science, but most weren't talking about memory. They were talking about loyalty, about grief, about the unbearable hope that maybe, just maybe, love really did outlast everything. The Millage Gazette picked it up first, a short front-page article titled, "Retired Firefighter Reunites with Long-Lost K9 After Believed Dead." Then came the regional news, and then national. Arthur, of course, had no idea. Not until Rachel showed up on his porch 2 days later with a laptop in one hand and disbelief all over her face. "Do you want the good news or the mildly terrifying news?" she asked. Arthur looked up from the garden hose he was coiling. "Neither," if it means someone wants to take him again. Rachel smiled. No one's taking him, but, people kind of fell in love with your story. He wiped his hands on his jeans. What people? She opened the laptop and turned the screen toward him. He squinted. His photo with Coda, the one from the fireplace, now had over 2 million views. News anchors, pet rescue influencers, even a famous country singer had reposted it, captioned, "Real love finds its way home." Arthur blinked. You're kidding. Rachel just grinned. The next few days blurred. Calls came in from all over. News channels asking for interviews. A rescue foundation in Arizona offered to sponsor a vet fund in Coda's name. A school teacher from Ohio sent a letter with 20 hand-drawn pictures from her third graders, each one showing Coda the hero dog in crayons and marker stars. Arthur tried to keep things normal. But something in town had shifted. At the grocery store, the cashier leaned over the counter and whispered, "I saw the video. You made me call my dad for the first time in 3 years." At the post office, someone had left a box of biscuits and a note that read, "For the good boy who made me believe again." And on the door of Haven Hollow Shelter, taped beside the hours of operation, someone had scribbled in Sharpie, "Some dogs don't come back for food, they come back for home." Arthur didn't enjoy the attention, but he understood the ripple. People weren't just reacting to the reunion, they were reacting to the possibility that something lost could still be found. That loyalty had memory, that pain could soften, that healing could walk in on 4 legs and say, "I remember you, I never forgot." One night, as the fireplace crackled and Coda lay snoring at Arthur's feet, Rachel returned with 2 folders, one marked Inquiries and the other labeled Adoptions. Arthur raised an eyebrow. All that because of one post? She nodded. Families are lining up to adopt senior dogs, dogs with scars, dogs no one wanted before. I had a woman call from Texas crying because her own rescue finally lay on her feet after months of hiding, right after she saw Coda's photo. Arthur looked down at Coda. The shepherd was sprawled like a king without a crown, legs kicked out, belly exposed, tongue half lolling from his mouth in complete surrender to comfort. "He's not just healing," Arthur said softly. "He's helping others do it too." Rachel smiled. "That's the power of being seen, of not giving up, of choosing to wait, even when the world forgets your name." Arthur looked at her. "Dogs remember, even when people don't." Rachel nodded. "Now it seems people are starting to remember too." And for the first time since that fire, Arthur felt something deeper than relief. He felt purpose. The first knock came on a Tuesday morning. Arthur had just poured a mug of black coffee, the kind that clung to the cup and smelled like memories. Coda sat by the window, alert but calm, his ears twitching to the rhythm of a world he never fully stopped scanning. When Arthur opened the door, he found a man in a faded police department jacket, gray at the temples, a limp in the left leg, and a hesitant kind of hope in his eyes. "Arthur Quinn?" the man asked. Arthur nodded. "I'm Officer Ray Delgado, retired now. I worked with Coda, back before the fire." He paused. "He saved my life." They sat in the living room, Coda stretched between them on the rug. Delgado kept his hands on his knees like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to touch. Coda, sensing no threat, blinked slowly and gave a low, tired sigh, the kind of sound dogs make when they feel safe enough to sleep. "I didn't believe it when I saw the photo online," Delgado said, his voice thick. "But then I saw the scar, the one behind his right shoulder. It's real, isn't it?"
Arthur nodded. Bullet wound. Year before he retired. He jumped between me and a junkie with a sawed off.
Delgado chuckled, but it cracked in the middle. He did the same for me. 2017, drug bust in Midland. The perp fired through a bathroom door. I would have taken it full on, but Coda tackled me just in time. I got a graze. He got the rest. He leaned forward. They gave him a medal, but no one told me he died. Just disappeared. You don't forget a dog like that. Arthur looked down at Coda. No, you don't. By the end of the week, the porch had become a waiting room, an EMT who remembered a collapsed building in East Ridge. I swear he led me out. Smoke so thick I couldn't see my hands. But I followed his steps. A middle school janitor who'd once been cornered by an intruder. All I heard was a growl. Then the guy was down. Thought I imagined it. But I remember those eyes. Even a quiet, stooped woman named May brought a photo, a grainy image of her daughter hugging a German shepherd in a hospital bed. He used to visit the pediatric wing on Fridays. My girl had leukemia, wouldn't speak to anyone, but with him, she smiled. First time in months. They came not to ask, but to remember, to reconnect, to say thank you, one after another, each with a story stitched into their life like a patch on a jacket, faded, but never lost. Rachel started keeping a notebook. Page after page, she wrote. Coda pulled me from wreckage after drunk driver crash. He guarded the school after lockdown. Kids called him Sergeant Fluff. Stopped me from walking off the bridge. Just sat there until I came back. Each story different, each one ending the same way. I never forgot him. The shelter held open hours that weekend, not for adoptions, but for stories. They set up chairs in a loose circle, brought coffee, laid out Coda's old photos on a corkboard labeled Service, Sacrifice, Still Standing. Arthur didn't speak much. He didn't need to. Because as people took turns standing, voices shaking and sometimes breaking, Coda lay in the center, not moving, just listening, as if their words mattered, as if he remembered too. An old trainer from a K-9 academy came with trembling hands and a box of ID tags. Most of these boys are gone now, he said, spreading them across the table like fallen medals. But Coda, he was different. He didn't just follow orders. He made choices. Arthur glanced down at his companion. You mean like getting himself captured instead of giving up? The man nodded. Exactly like that. As the sun dipped behind the Haven Hollow tree line that evening, the shelter's courtyard was filled with quiet footsteps and full hearts. No music, no speeches, just candles, one for every story shared that day. And in the center, beside Arthur, Coda sat tall, eyes clear, ears perked, no longer just a rescued dog, a witness, a survivor, a symbol. Someone handed Arthur a letter. No name, just a line scribbled in blue pen. You didn't just save him. You reminded the rest of us what loyalty looks like when the world forgets. Arthur folded it slowly and tucked it into his pocket without a word. That night, back at home, Coda rested his head on Arthur's lap as they sat beneath the old family photo wall. A fire crackled low. Arthur whispered, "They came, you know. They remembered. All this time, they remembered you." Coda's tail thumped once against the floor, and Arthur, eyes glassy but steady, said what he'd never dared say aloud. "You were never just mine." The reporter arrived with a notepad and a jacket that didn't quite fit. Young, earnest, and trying not to show how nervous he was. "Mr. Quinn?" he asked, glancing down at his notes. Mind if I ask a few questions for Channel 9's Everyday Heroes segment? Arthur raised an eyebrow. He wasn't used to cameras, and he didn't care for spotlights. But he looked down at Coda calm at his feet, head resting on crossed paws, eyes half closed in that way dogs do when they feel safe, and something shifted. He nodded once. Just don't make me sound like a saint. The young man smiled. I think the dog's already taken that role. They sat on the porch, surrounded by hanging ferns, and the gentle ticking of a wind chime Arthur never remembered buying. The camera stayed off at first, just notes, quiet observations, little questions that danced around the real one. So, what made you take him home that day? Arthur looked out at the tree line. His voice was low, steady. He wasn't supposed to be touched, but when I looked in his eyes, I didn't see a threat. I saw someone who'd been waiting. Not to be saved, just to be seen. The reporter scribbled something. And when did you realize it was him? Arthur gave a slow exhale through his nose. The moment he let out that cry, it wasn't loud, just familiar, like a voice I hadn't heard in a year, but somehow still remembered. Coda lifted his head and pressed it gently to Arthur's thigh. The camera switched on with a soft beep, and the porch light caught the gray in Arthur's beard, the quiet behind his eyes. The reporter adjusted his mic. If there's one thing you'd want people to take away from this story, what would it be? Arthur didn't answer right away. He looked at the dog beside him, the scars that hadn't faded, the strength that hadn't dulled, the trust that had somehow survived it all. Then he looked at the reporter, eyes steady. I'd say this: adopt the ones no one wants. He paused, swallowed hard. That's what I did. I just didn't know. He was the one I lost. The clip aired 3 nights later. Short, quiet. No dramatic music, no flashy editing. Just an old man in a flannel shirt, a German shepherd at his feet, and a truth that didn't need dressing up. The segment was only 3 minutes long, but it did what some things rarely do anymore. It lingered. Comments flooded in. We adopted a senior dog because of this. Why am I crying at 2 a.m. over a dog I've never met? He speaks like my grandfather used to, gentle, but every word hits. The shelter's inbox filled with messages not just about Coda, but about others. Forgotten dogs, injured dogs, hard-to-love dogs, and the people willing to change that. Rachel printed them out and taped them on the wall above her desk. She called it the Wall of Yes. Arthur never read them, but he smiled when he saw them. A week later, a quiet family came in. Mom, Dad, 2 kids, and a notebook full of questions. They'd seen the interview. They asked about a 3-legged hound mix in the corner kennel. Is she mean? The little girl asked. Arthur, who had just stopped by to drop off Coda's old toy box, looked at her and said, No, she's just been hurt by people who never gave her time. The girl tilted her head. But she's still waiting? Arthur smiled. Yes, and she's not the only one? They took the dog home that day. Rachel found Arthur in the parking lot and told him. She wasn't crying, not really, but her voice caught when she said, They said your words made them see her differently. Arthur looked down at Coda. Wasn't my words. Weeks passed, then a month. Coda began walking more freely through the shelter halls, his tail a little higher, his pace less cautious. He'd pause by certain kennels, sit beside dogs that barked at everyone else, and slowly those dogs began to calm. Rachel noticed first. "He's like gravity," she whispered once. "He doesn't pull, he just steadies." Arthur didn't call himself a rescuer, didn't like the word hero. But more and more people came not just to adopt, but to listen. And Arthur, reluctant at first, started to speak, not to boast, but to remind that love isn't measured in pedigree or paperwork or whether a tail wags the first time. It's measured in quiet mornings, in beds that aren't empty anymore, in the sound of claws tapping down a hallway that once echoed with silence. One morning, as frost curled over the fields and mist lifted off the road, Arthur found a note tucked beneath a coffee tin someone had left on his porch. It read, "You saved a dog they gave up on, but maybe he saved something in all of us, too." Arthur folded the paper and didn't speak for a long while. Then he looked down at Coda and whispered, "Still think I rescued you?" Coda, as always, said nothing. But his eyes, they spoke plenty. The rain wasn't heavy. It whispered, a steady mist that hung like breath in cold memory. Every drop that touched the crumbling sidewalk seemed to echo. Arthur hadn't meant to come this way. The old warehouse district, with its half-burnt brick skeletons, still carried the scent of ash when it rained. Coda walked close, unusually still. Every few steps he'd stop, ears twitching, nose lifted as if the past spoke in frequencies only he could hear. Arthur adjusted his hood and looked up at the ruins. "This was it," he murmured, "where we thought you died." Coda stopped. The leash tightened. Then, with silent urgency, he pulled. Arthur stumbled, but followed as Coda led them down a hidden side alley, a place no one searched. Coda began to dig, not manic, but deliberate. Arthur knelt, heart thudding. A soft click. Beneath damp soil lay a shattered canine harness clip, bent and blackened by flame. A rusted gear pouch nearby, half-burned nylon strap clinging to a cracked carabiner. Coda dug deeper, then whimpered. Arthur saw it, a small bone, maybe a finger, beside a badge fragment melted into plastic. The letters faintly visible. Unit 92, K9 Division. Arthur's chest constricted. It wasn't just memory. It was proof. Coda had seen it, survived it, carried it. Arthur sank to his knees, rain soaking him. Coda leaned into him, trembling, not in fear but release. "You didn't run, did you? You stayed." They sat beneath the weeping sky, man, dog, and ghosts. Time paused. Coda rested his head on Arthur's lap, eyes closed, not in pain, but peace. Arthur slipped the broken badge into his pocket. "You brought me here to remember. Maybe also so you could forget." The rain fell in fine sheets as they stood outside the alley. Behind them, the shallow grave of memory lay disturbed. Coda stiffened. Near the collapsed dock stood a man tall, leaning on one leg, a thick scar from jaw to collarbone. He watched, then turned and walked away, limping heavily, vanishing into the ruins. Arthur called out, but the man was gone. That night at the shelter, Arthur told Rachel, "I saw someone. Big scar. Limped." Rachel's face changed. "I've seen him. Months ago. Stood by the kennels just staring." Arthur pressed. "No name. Rumor is he worked private security, fired after ties to underground training circles trafficking military canines, discarded dogs they claimed were too damaged to reassign." Arthur's stomach turned. If he took Coda, then Coda didn't just survive the explosion, he was taken. Coda sat by the door, eyes on the night, like the past hadn't finished with them. The storm came fast. Thunder cracked. Rain pelted the shelter. Then a snarl, low and panicked. The mudroom door splintered inward. "Coda!" The dog stood, chest heaving, growling not at Arthur, but at some phantom born of thunder. Arthur didn't shout. He sat amid the wreckage and waited. The storm raged. Coda lunged at air, barking at ghosts. Arthur whispered, "It's not real anymore." Slowly the barking faded. Coda shook, then lowered himself inch by inch. A whine escaped, not asking forgiveness, just understanding. Arthur inched closer. "You don't have to protect me anymore. You don't have to relive it. You came back. That's enough." Coda blinked, then pressed his head into Arthur's chest. Later, Arthur patched the door as best he could, left it half open, not as a test but an invitation. Coda slept by the hearth, his breath slow and steady. Arthur watched the fire fade and whispered, "You came back." The school was quiet in a way most schools weren't. Warm colors, low voices. The sign out front read, "Willow Path Center, for children with special needs," with a paw print in chalk below. Arthur gripped Coda's leash gently. They'd been invited, no press, just a handwritten note. "Some of our kids don't do well with people, but sometimes they respond to dogs in ways we don't understand. If he's up for it, we'd be honored." Arthur hadn't answered for 3 days. Then he folded the note, slipped it into his pocket, and whispered, "What do you think, partner?" Coda had already been waiting at the door. Inside the classroom, children watched quietly, some curious, some hesitant. Coda entered calmly, no barking, no pulling. In a corner behind a bookshelf sat a boy, small and pale, hands clenched in his lap. "That's Caleb," the teacher whispered. "He doesn't speak. Not since his dad passed last year." Coda saw him. Without command, he approached slow, steady, and sat nearby, not looking directly at the boy. The room held its breath. Caleb reached out, fingers trembling, and touched fur. Coda leaned in, just enough. The boy leaned his forehead against Coda's shoulder. Later, the teacher pulled Arthur aside. "After you left, Caleb said a word. He touched his chest and said, 'Safe.'" Arthur blinked hard. Coda lifted his head from across the room as if sensing the ripple had begun. At the county shelter, the air was heavy with bleach, despair, and the weight of too many lost chances. Arthur and Coda followed Leo, a staffer, past rows of kennels. "We usually don't let visitors back here," Leo said, but Rachel thought Coda might help one of ours. They stopped at Kennel 42. Inside, a small, scarred German shepherd crouched in the corner, growling softly, not threatening, just pleading, "Stay away." Coda stepped forward. The dog snapped at the air. Coda paused, turned his head slightly, non-threatening. Another step. Then he sat, waiting, silent. Minutes passed. The other dog's growl faded. His breathing slowed. He crept to the bars, nose touching Coda's fur, then slumped against the gate, as if finally safe enough to rest. Arthur knelt. Sometimes they don't need a rescue. They need someone who's been there. Coda stayed still and seen. As the sun sank, Arthur and Rachel lingered at the shelter. Rachel spoke quietly. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. Dogs like Coda, they give everything. And when they're too old, too broken, they're supposed to fade away. I don't want that anymore." She handed Arthur a clipboard, second watch, a sketch, a German shepherd beside a pair of worn boots, paw resting over them. Let's start a sanctuary, a real one. For the ones no one else wants, you and Coda, you'd be the heart of it. Arthur traced the paper, smiled, and nodded. That night, as they stepped into the cold, Rachel asked, "Are you sure you're ready?" Arthur glanced at Coda. "I'm not, but he is." And together they walked into their new purpose. Not just survivors anymore, founders. The letter came without a return address, a plain white envelope taped shut sloppily, with Arthur Lang typed across the front. No stamp, no warmth. Like it had been delivered by spite alone. Arthur left it on the kitchen counter for 2 days. When he finally opened it, it wasn't curiosity, it was duty. Inside, "He should have stayed gone. Canines are not pets, they are weapons. You're endangering the town." No signature, no greeting, just cold words and a photo. Worn and creased, a younger man holding a golden retriever puppy badge on his belt, faint smile, a dog's tail mid-wag. Arthur stared, then fed the letter into the fire. But the photo? He pinned it to the fridge. Coda padded in, ears forward. Arthur murmured, "People forget what they once loved." Coda sniffed the fridge and whined softly. Arthur knelt, resting his hand on Coda's scar. "They see a job. I see you." Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Inside, firelight danced across the dog who had been written off, but not anymore. They didn't call it a parade at first, just Millage Rescue Adoption Day. But when that first May Saturday dawned bright, it felt bigger. Children chased bubbles, balloons floated above signs. "Second chances start here." Arthur walked at the front, not in uniform, just beside Coda, who wore a vest reading, "Retired, not replaced." The crowd parted. Children reached out. A girl with pink glasses asked, "Is he a good boy?" "The best," her mother said. Arthur loosened the leash. The girl stroked Coda's scar. Coda leaned in. No command needed, just understanding. Phones clicked. Laughter rippled. People who once crossed the street at the sight of a working canine now waited their turn to kneel beside one. Rachel appeared, breathless. 17 adoptions pending. 2 seniors, Arthur." He smiled. "Miracles come in pairs." Music floated from the gazebo. A boy held a poster. "Still worth saving." Arthur knelt beside Coda. "You carried the weight. Let the world carry you now." Coda licked his cheek and sat, proud, a statue of survival carved from memory. The event wound down. Only a few volunteers remained. Arthur and Coda stood at the square's edge, ready to leave. Then he saw him, the man, limping from the shadows, hat low, jacket worn thin, the scar on his cheek unmistakable. This time, the man didn't run. He crossed the street slowly, stopped, dropped to one knee before Coda. He pulled out a bent, rusted tag, K9, number 47. "I was the one," he said hoarsely. "I pulled him out that night. They told me to leave him, said he was dead. I was scared. And I've lived with that." Coda stepped forward. No bark, no growl. Just a nudge to the man's chest, and a lick to his hand. A scar meeting a scar. Forgiveness, quiet, real. The man cried, not loudly. Just enough for tears to dot the ground. Arthur asked gently, "What's your name?" "Noah. Noah Price." Arthur nodded. "You came back." "I didn't think he'd let me close." "Arthur, He remembers the pain, but he never forgets the truth. Arthur handed the tag back. He kept it all this time. Might as well stay with the man who first brought him home. Noah hesitated. I don't know what to do now. Start by coming back tomorrow, Arthur said. There's always another dog that needs someone who didn't give up. Noah nodded and left. Not dramatically, just a man with a scar, finally walking forward. Coda rested his head against Arthur's knee, and for the first time that day, the square was silent, not from absence, but from peace. The first morning came with mist, curling around the worn gravel driveway like breath from the earth. Dew clung to every blade of grass. The old oak at Haven Hollow Shelter stood tall, its branches swaying as if honoring a promise fulfilled. Arthur adjusted his frayed navy tie, a faded paw-print pin at the knot. Beside him, Rachel clutched her clipboard, eyes glassy with pride. Local press set up their cameras, but this wasn't a story for spectacle. It just needed to be true. The shelter's new wing, an L-shaped addition with cedar trim and low windows so dogs could see the sunrise, stood ready. Above the door, Coda's Corner, for the warriors who still wait. A plaque beside the door read, Every life matters, some just bark louder. Coda stood quietly by Arthur's side, no vest, no leash, just a harness marked retired, not forgotten. Children arrived first, clutching cards and photos. One boy in a plastic firefighter hat whispered, My uncle's partner. He didn't come home. Arthur didn't need to ask if he meant the dog or the man. By mid-morning, the field was filled. Former canine handlers, families, shelter staff, and dogs, some in vests, some trembling or scarred, others limping faithfully beside their people. Arthur stepped to the mic. This isn't about what these dogs did. It's about what they survived. He nodded at Coda, and how some found their way back. Rachel unlocked the new wing. Inside, soft music, the scent of lavender and cedar wood, memory foam pads instead of newspapers, blankets folded neatly, a shelf of toys, some new, some chewed and beloved. At the far end, beneath stained glass of a shepherd's silhouette, was an empty bed with a nameplate, J. Arthur hadn't known Rachel would do that. He placed his hand on Coda's back and they walked in together. Coda chose a quiet kennel and lay down as if saying, This one's good. This is where they'll feel safe. One by one, guests entered, kneeling, whispering names, tracing plaques. A woman cried, not from sadness, but from relief. Noah Price appeared, watching from a distance. When Rachel handed him a clipboard, he hesitated, then signed, Volunteer Application, K9 Rehabilitation. At the property's edge, wind chimes made of old dog tags whispered names into the breeze. Arthur stood in the sunlight, Coda beside him, recalling his late wife's words. Sometimes healing doesn't look like medicine. Sometimes it looks like belonging. Coda leaned gently into Arthur's leg, and for that moment it felt like the world had gotten something right. That afternoon, at the quiet training field, 6 recruits stood with their new dogs. One young shepherd growled at a crow. His handler tugged the leash. Don't, Arthur said, stepping from the shade, Coda silently at his side. Don't punish fear. Understand it. Arthur knelt near the growling dog, offered no commands, just presence. The growl stopped. The dog tilted his head. If you're here to make these dogs obey, Arthur told the group, you're in the wrong place. Obedience can be forced, trust is earned, and it lasts longer. a recruit asked. But, sir, what about dominance models, alpha conditioning? Arthur nodded. And some of those dogs die early, or freeze when their handler yells louder than the gunfire. He asked another, What's your dog's name? Maxwell. He was a narcotics reject, hesitated too much. Hesitation isn't failure, it's thoughtfulness. Most dogs I've trusted with my life, they hesitated before saving it. He gestured at Coda. This one spent a year chained in the dark. Everyone thought he was dead. But he's working again? Someone whispered. No, he's healing and teaching. If you stop looking for performance and start listening for pain, you'll learn too. Another asked, What if the old methods don't work? Unlearn them, Arthur said simply. And if you don't know where to start with silence. Sit with them. Let them show you how they want to be led. One by one, recruits knelt with their dogs. Coda walked among them, touching noses, bringing the pairs together not as dogs and handlers, but as partners. Arthur watched from beneath the cedar tree, scribbling a note in his pocket notebook. If you want a warrior, earn his soul first. Rachel joined him. You're building something here. They are, Arthur replied. I just stopped getting in the way. He tossed a discarded training manual filled with choke collar diagrams and compliance drills into the trash. As the day waned, Arthur sat on a bench beneath the old sycamore, Coda at his feet. From his pocket, he drew a pocket knife Jay had given him years ago. With care, he carved into the armrest. Coda, this is your second life. And mine too, he spoke softly. Funny how carving makes it real. Saying it out loud wouldn't be enough. He remembered all the nights he came to this spot after they said Coda was gone, wondering if he'd failed him. Coda rested his muzzle on Arthur's thigh. That was enough. Arthur rubbed his ear. You never stopped trying to come back, did you? Coda's tail thumped once. I didn't believe in second lives until you walked back into mine. As dusk painted the sky orange and violet, Arthur hummed the lullaby Jay once sang to Coda as a pup. The melody blended with the rustling leaves. In that moment they weren't two broken souls, they were just here, beneath a tree older than grief, on a bench carved with a name that refused to be forgotten. And for once the past didn't hurt. It simply rested. The first crack of thunder shook the sky like a war drum. Rain pelted the roof of Haven Hollow in sheets, angry and relentless. Wind screamed through the treetops, rattling the window panes, and then, just as Rachel reached for the emergency lantern, the entire shelter was swallowed in black. The lights died with a flicker and a groan. The silence that followed was thick, tight, a breath held too long. Then came the sounds no one wanted to hear. Barking, panic, scraping claws against concrete. The dogs, young, old, rescued, waiting, sensed the storm in their bones. It wasn't the thunder that scared them most. It was the darkness, the way it made the world feel unanchored, like nothing was where it should be. Rachel's flashlight clicked. Nothing. She cursed softly. Backup generator. Come on. A low whimper echoed from the far end of the kennel corridor. Another bark turned into a high-pitched yelp. Then a metal water bowl clanged against the floor as something knocked it over. Rachel ran toward the commotion, heart racing, half blind. Then she stopped cold, because through the blackness lit only by the occasional flicker of lightning, there moved a shadow, not skittish, not chaotic, calm, measured, deliberate. Coda. He was already out of his kennel. She didn't know how some dogs have instincts you don't question. He moved like a soldier through the corridor, weaving past the cages, pressing his nose to one whimpering pup after another, not barking, not growling, just being there. The younger dogs quieted as he passed. A trembling mutt with half a tail lowered his head. A one-eyed Labrador mix stopped pacing and sat, ears back, watching. Rachel found herself frozen. It wasn't the kind of leadership you taught. It was the kind that was born in fire and never unlearned. A crash of thunder rattled the glass again. A few cages rattled with frightened paws. Then the sound that made Rachel's blood run cold. The storm doors in the back hallway ajar. Wind had blown them wide open. If any dog ran through them, they'd be gone into the night. And they'd never find their way back. "Coda!" she called, voice sharp, urgent. But Coda had already turned. His ears flicked once, his body angled, and without hesitation he ran toward the danger. Rachel followed. By the time she reached the hallway, Coda was already at the threshold of the open doors, body planted like a stone wall. One by one, frightened dogs had begun to trickle toward the open gap, but stopped short when they saw him. He didn't bark. He didn't snarl. He simply stood tall, tail straight, gaze locked with each of them like a command in silence. "Do not run. You are safe. Stay." And they did. Rachel watched, stunned, as a puppy barely 3 months old crept forward on unsure legs, drawn by the light and the scent of rain, but stopped when Coda turned his head slowly and sat, blocking the doorway. The puppy whimpered. Coda leaned in, sniffed the pup's ear, and nudged him gently back toward safety. The others followed, not like a pack, but like a procession. A line of once broken creatures, taught by trauma to flinch at every sound, now guided home by one of their own. Rachel didn't realize she was crying until her voice caught in her throat. The thunder rolled again, but the shelter did not erupt. This time, it held. And so did Coda. When the last dog was inside and the wind began to die down, Coda turned and walked toward Rachel. His fur was damp. His chest rose and fell with controlled rhythm. He wasn't trembling. He hadn't panicked. He'd stayed, not because he had to, because he chose to. Rachel knelt as he reached her, placing both hands on the sides of his face. "You weren't just trained for this," she whispered. "You were made for this." Coda licked her cheek once, then leaned into her chest for a single heartbeat before turning back toward the rows of kennels. He didn't go to his own. He laid down in the middle of the corridor where they could all see him. Some of the dogs watched from their crates, others curled back into their beds. The smallest pup shaking, soaked, curled against Coda's side without hesitation. The power flickered back on 20 minutes later, but the light wasn't what made the building feel safe again. It was the figure in the hallway. Silent, unmoving, warm. Rachel turned as Arthur stepped into view, eyes wide, hair damp from the rain. He took in the scene, the open door now closed, the calm in the air, the pup against Coda's chest, and whispered, barely loud enough for Rachel to hear, "He's not retired." Rachel nodded slowly, voice trembling. "He's chosen." And outside, the storm finally passed. The kettle never whistled. It had been set on the stove, like always, Arthur's quiet ritual after morning rounds at the shelter. But this time, the water boiled alone. Steam spiraled into the kitchen air, untouched, unseen, because Arthur had never made it back. In the living room, beneath the soft light of the fireplace, he lay crumpled beside the armchair. One hand still clutched the leash. His glasses had fallen sideways. His lips parted like he'd been about to speak something mundane, something kind. But no words came, only the silence. And then, a low, urgent whine. Coda found him first. He pushed open the hallway door with his nose, already sensing something wrong. No command had been given, no invitation made. But the bond didn't ask for permission anymore. Coda stepped closer. His ears perked forward, body taut with instinct. He sniffed, then let out a single bark, not loud but sharp. A call. A signal. Arthur didn't move. Coda leaned down, nuzzled his cheek, then licked once slow, deliberate along the line of Arthur's jaw. Still no response. Then Coda did something he hadn't done since the war. He pressed his body flush to the ground, muzzle low, and let out a deep, vibrating sound that echoed from his chest into the stillness of the room. It wasn't panic. It was alert. And it was enough. Rachel arrived minutes later. She'd forgotten her clipboard in the barn and was walking up the porch when she saw Coda through the window sitting, unmoving, head tilted at a strange angle. She didn't knock. She ran. The door flung open, footsteps raced across the hardwood. She nearly slipped on the leash stretched across the floor. "Arthur!" Coda didn't flinch. He looked at her, then back at the man on the ground. His gaze said everything. He's still here. But not for long. Rachel dropped to her knees, checked for breath, for pulse. Still faint, but fading. "We need help," she whispered, already dialing. Through it all, Coda stayed close. He didn't bark, he didn't pace. He just lay there, head resting on Arthur's chest, as if by anchoring his weight he could tether him back to life. And maybe he did. Later. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and quiet grief. Arthur lay under white sheets, a monitor beeping in a steady rhythm beside him. IVs ran like quiet lifelines from machines to veins. His eyes fluttered, then opened. The first thing he saw was fur, and a tail wagging once. Coda stood by the bedside. No leash, no vest, no command. Just presence. Rachel was seated in the corner, her eyes red-rimmed but wide with relief. They said it was a massive drop in blood pressure. Stress, dehydration. Could have gone worse. Arthur turned his head slowly. His hand, still trembling, lifted weakly toward the edge of the bed. Coda leaned in, placing his chin in that weathered palm like it was the most natural thing in the world. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Arthur's voice came, hoarse but certain. "He still listens, even now." A tear slipped down Rachel's cheek. She looked at Coda, at the gray in his muzzle, the scars beneath his fur, the unwavering calm in his gaze. Not a guard dog anymore, not a soldier, just a soul who remembered, and responded to the only command that ever mattered: stay, when no one else could. Stay, when the world moved on. Stay, even when the body broke, when the voice faltered, when time did what war could not. And Coda had obeyed. Not because he was trained to, because he chose to. That night, as Arthur drifted in and out of sleep, Coda didn't leave the room. He curled beside the bed the way he had beside the fireplace. No barking, no restlessness, only presence. And when a nurse peeked in at 2:14 a.m., she paused at the doorway, then quietly backed out. She didn't want to disturb the man and his shadow. Some bonds, she thought, don't end. They just grow quieter. The hill wasn't high, but it was honest. Grass bent gently under morning wind, the kind that carried memory more than chill. Birds sang like they were remembering something, not announcing it. Below, the town of Millage, stirred slowly to life, porch lights flicking off, coffee pots humming, dogs barking at mailmen who hadn't arrived yet. But up here, it was still. Arthur sat on an old wooden bench, smoothed by time and softened by moss. His coat lay folded beside him. He didn't need it, not with Coda beside him. The dog hadn't moved since they arrived, just sat close, eyes forward, ears tilted toward the wind. Not alert, not guarding, just present, as if this was the last post he'd ever needed, as if he knew it was sacred. Arthur let out a breath, not tired, not sad, just full. And then, as the first gold spill of sunlight crossed the distant rooftops, Arthur finally spoke. His voice wasn't strong. It didn't need to be. "Coda," he said softly, like the name was both a question and a prayer. The dog didn't turn, just let his ears twitch once, then slowly rested his chin on Arthur's knee. Arthur's hand moved without thinking, brushing gently along the fur that had grown silver in patches. Scar tissue hid beneath, but it didn't matter. He knew every ridge now, every healed wound, every spot where the past had once screamed, and now only whispered. "I used to walk this hill alone," Arthur said, voice catching on something that wasn't sadness. "After they told me you were gone." A pause. The breeze moved the leaves above, soft and low, like applause meant for someone else. "I'd call your name," he continued. "Not out loud, just in here." He touched his chest. "I'd wonder if you heard me, if maybe somewhere out there you paused, just once, for no reason, because something familiar brushed through your bones." Coda didn't answer. He didn't have to. "I thought I lost you forever," Arthur said, voice quieter now. "But maybe love isn't a leash." He looked out across the town at the rooftops he used to patrol, the park where Jay once played fetch, the clinic with the mural of dogs in flight. "Maybe it's a voice that never stops calling." Coda shifted slightly. His body leaned in, slow and deliberate, until the full weight of his head settled in Arthur's lap. Heavy, trusting, final. Arthur smiled, his fingers finding the space behind Coda's ear. "You heard me, didn't you?" he whispered. The dog let out a long sigh. Not a whimper, not a groan, just breath, just yes. The sun crested fully now, bathing the hill in amber light. For a moment the bench cast two shadows, one tall, one four-legged side by side, pointing toward a town that had forgotten, then remembered. Arthur leaned back, head tilted to the sky. He didn't need answers anymore, just moments like this. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something worn, creased edges, the ink faded from years of folding and unfolding, Jay's last drawing, a stick-figure man, a dog, and above them 3 words written in a child's blocky scrawl, "Best friends forever." Arthur smiled, tucked the paper against Coda's collar. "Guess the kid knew something we didn't." In the distance, a bell rang once from the old church tower, soft and slow, like it was waking too. And for the first time in a long time, Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't ache. He just was. Because some bonds aren't made of metal or words. They're made of mornings like this, of names whispered through storms, of hills climbed not for the view, but for the peace at the top, and of dogs who never needed to be leashed to stay. In a world that often rushes past quiet loyalty and unseen scars, stories like Arthur and Coda's remind us of what truly endures, the bond between a human heart and a dog who never stopped listening. German shepherds, like Coda, aren't just guardians or heroes in uniform. They are reminders of resilience, memory, and unconditional love. They don't measure time the way we do. They measure it in footsteps beside us, in the space they keep warm when we forget we're not alone. This wasn't just a story about reunion, it was about second chances, about how even after the world says it's too late, healing can still begin, and that sometimes the most broken among us become the strongest protectors. If you've ever looked into the eyes of a dog and felt understood, if you've ever whispered a name into silence, hoping it might echo back then, this story is for you. May it inspire you to believe in quiet comebacks, to see the value in what others overlook, and to always, always listen when love calls, because it just might be calling back. Adopt, support. Remember, sometimes the ones who saved us are still waiting to be found.